Good afternoon, everybody. Cheers. I hope you have your caffeinated beverage of choice with you today. My name's Jacob Dye. I'm the host here at Highly Caffeinated Therapy, the podcast. And today we're obviously trying something new with the added video feature. And today's episode is the second installment in a four-part series on what I refer to as the four pillars of mental wellness. Last episode, we talked about the first pillar, which is gratitude. Today, we'll talk about the second pillar, which is agency. And then over the next couple of episodes, we'll look at the final two pillars, which are humility and meaning or purpose. So agency, whenever I write it up on my board here in office, is the one that I usually get some head scratching because that's not a term that we use often and it's not something we hear often. And to help us out here, I went ahead and pulled up the technical definition of agency, which says to have agency means to have the ability to make your own choices and decisions. Essentially, feeling a sense of control over your actions and the power to influence your own life or a particular situation. It signifies the capacity to act independently and take responsibility for your choices. So what does agency, having a personal sense of agency, have to do with being mentally well? Well, when I encounter people who have significant mental or emotional illness, they tend to have a very low sense of agency. To use a different term other than agency here, if you have agency, you have what we would call an internal locus of control. If you have very low agency or no agency, you tend to have a more external locus of control. So internal locus of control or agency says, yes, there are things that occur, things that can happen to me, and I don't necessarily have control over whether or not those things happen. I do have control over and a choice in what I do with that moving forward. And hopefully you can see how that would be really important, like a very important thing to think and a very important philosophy to kind of have. Counter to that, if we have very low agency or an external locus of control, for the lack of a better term, we basically just are a victim. And it's this perpetual victim mentality. Why do bad things keep happening to me? Why do these things happen to me? Nothing ever goes my way. I don't have any control here. And one of the hallmarks of individuals who are on the mental illness side of the spectrum, they focus a lot on the very specific things that they don't have control over and obsess over the fact that they don't have control in those areas. Whereas having agency means that I have acceptance around the areas of my life where I don't have control, but I redirect my focus towards my internal state, my thoughts, my feelings, my actions, because that gives me this sense of empowerment. No, I can't control that this thing, external event occurred. I can control what I do with it. My pastor, Pastor Phil Wilson, if you're listening, he said once, and it's one of the things that I think of a lot. He says, things either make you bitter or they make you better. And so having a high sense of agency means that we're focused on being made better by the circumstances that we face, the challenges that we face, as opposed to allowing ourselves to become bitter, to become resentful, to become ungrateful, hearkening back to our last episode, by focusing on the aspects that we don't have control over or don't have influence over. So, what are things that we have agency over? Well, as I've detailed in previous episodes, my being a cognitive behavioral therapist and a Stoic philosopher at heart, I think, very much my opinion on this is influenced by that. So I welcome disagreement. And if you think something else, that's fine. So what do we have agency over? We have agency over our thoughts. We have agency over, to a certain degree, our emotions. We have agency over our actions. We have agency in a lot of circumstances over what we do with our body, what we put in our body. We have agency over the things that we say and how we say them. We have agency over choices that we make, even if we're in a circumstance where we feel there's not a choice, there's a choice. Now, it may be really hard to make an alternative choice. That can be true. But if we're sticking with this idea of having agency, even in the quote unquote most impossible of circumstances, I have the ability to choose. And to this point, this is where people push back and say, well, Jacob, you don't know what's going on in my life. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know the things I've experienced, so on and so forth. And there's pushback, and that's fine. I'm all about having some healthy disagreement. But this is where I point people to Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl was Jewish, lived in Germany during World War II, pre-World War II and World War II and after, and was a survivor of the Holocaust. And his book, Man's Search for Meaning, I believe is one of the most influential books that has been written, particularly when we're talking about how do we deal with trauma, how do we deal with the incredibly painful things that occur in our life. And his major quote in that book, and in the essence of being specific here, I'm going to make sure I have it pulled up and ready to go. But his quote from the book is by far one of my favorite quotes. And if you'll bear with me, I'm going to pull that up. He says, quote, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing. That is the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." So, let me say that again. Viktor Frankl says, upon reflecting on his time in a concentration camp, family, friends being in a concentration camp, has this quote and says, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And again, that's Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And, in talking about agency here, a lot of times there are things and circumstances that we can't control. He could not control where he was. He could not control to a certain degree, what was happening to him. But another one of his more powerful quotes from that book says, "When we can no longer change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And that is the embodiment of having personal agency. That even when incredibly difficult circumstances come our way, we, look for the aspects of that we can control. And inevitably, we hit the wall and we recognize that we're not able to control something, we're not able to influence something. And so then, rather than giving up, rather than, falling into complaining and non-acceptance, which takes our pain and turns it into suffering, if we can accept it and say, okay, I can't change what's happening to me, but I can change. I can change how I respond in this situation. I can choose the attitude that I'm going to bring in this circumstance. And this can look like a lot of different things. If you work in a job that has a very toxic culture, you can actively work to try and change that culture. You're limited in what you can do. But you can choose whether or not you show up every day and continue to put forth good effort and good work and have a good attitude, or you can choose not to. And the choice is yours. So the opposite side of this, lack of agency, it's victimhood and victimhood culture. I'm very outspoken in my disagreements with aspects of my profession, particularly the more sociological aspects of my profession, particularly the ones that are rooted in what is an overtly Marxist philosophy. And, one of those things that you see it floating around from time to time, or what's called the wheel of power. And the closer you are to the center in that wheel, the more privileged you are, and the more power you have. And the further out on that wheel, the less privileged and the less power you have. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. Because taking that approach of, oh, well, because I meet this particular criteria, I sit in this particular category, I check this particular box or don't check this box over here, means that I don't have power and there's nothing I can do, just keeps you where you are and keeps you stuck. I've sat with many clients who, check the boxes of not, quote unquote, non-empowered people, but they have high degrees of agency and they overcome and they're successful and they're wonderful people to be around and they're a light to those around them. Does that mean they haven't encountered hardship? No, of course not. But they've taken that hardship and have chosen to be made better by it and to improve their life regardless of the forces working against them. And here's the thing. It doesn't matter where you are on that, again, garbage wheel of power. It doesn't matter where you are on there. We all face challenges. If you're listening to this, there are things in your life that are hard for you that aren't hard for other people. There are things that you don't have that other people do have. Why? Because that's life. Life isn't fair. As one of my clients said one time, fair is where you go to ride the ponies, and I don't see any ponies. So life's not fair. Life has painful moments. But if we sit in acceptance of those painful moments, and we accept what we're powerless over, and as the Serenity Prayer suggests, we ask God to give us the wisdom to change what we can and accept what we can't change and the wisdom to know the difference. As we grow in that wisdom and grow in our own sense of personal agency, we become mentally and emotionally healthier. And then when you pair that with gratitude, which we talked about last week, that's a game changer. And that's just 2 of the 4 pillars of mental wellness. So I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you can take some things from today and look for the areas of your life where you have control, where you have agency. And rather than staying locked in and focused on those things that you don't have control over, try redirecting your attention to whether it be your mindset, your attitude, change, if you're focused on something you can't control, there's something in your life you have control over, so focus on that. So I hope this was helpful for you. I look forward to being back with you again next week as we talk about humility and why that's important. And then we'll wrap up the 4-part series with meaning and purpose. So cheers to all of you. Enjoy your highly caffeinated beverages today, and we will see you again here in a couple of weeks.